On the 30th of January 1661, the exhumed body of one of the most famous English historical figures was displayed in front of a crowd and dragged behind a horse in London. Oliver Cromwell's decaying remains were taken to Tyburn to be subjected to a posthumous execution, as the former Lord Protector had died some time before. His body was taken to the famous site where hundreds were hanged, drawn and quartered over the centuries, and where King Henry VIII had his evil way with many of his victims, subjecting them to some of the worst executions imaginable. But Cromwell's body was hacked to pieces, and an executioner had great difficulty in taking the head off the corpse, and it took around 8 blows of the sharp axe to do this. But the head of Cromwell was then placed above Westminster Hall on the orders of King Charles II, and it was placed on a 20-foot high pole and spike high above the site associated with Parliament. But the head of Oliver Cromwell remained high above the City of London for many years, acting as a fearsome and brutal reminder not to cross the king. But at some point the head fell, and the head of Oliver Cromwell went on a bizarre and strange journey which would last for centuries. Join us today as we look at the disturbing story of Oliver Cromwell's unburied head, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Oliver Cromwell is remembered for being the commander of Parliament's army and the New Model Army during the English Civil War. He was pitted against King Charles I's Royalist army, and the king had raised his standard to take the fight against Parliament, but he would be defeated in the bloodiest conflict that ever occurred on English soil. But following the victory of Parliament, a republic was declared in England, and the monarchy was abolished. But Cromwell would then be a leading figure behind putting the king on trial. It was an incredible sight. King Charles I, a king many believed had been sent by God to rule, being brought to trial accused of treason against his own people. Cromwell was a strong advocate for the king's execution, and he got his wish, and Charles I was executed in January 1649, being beheaded by an axeman who was rather skilled. But following this, Cromwell would become the Lord Protector, and he saw himself as a watchman over the English people and kingdom, and he was even offered the title of king and the crown, but he turned this down. However, on the 3rd of September 1658, Oliver Cromwell died inside of the Palace of Whitehall. He had been ill with malaria, and he may have even died from blood poisoning, but his funeral would be a huge occasion, and was based upon the funeral of King James I, the father of the man who Cromwell would advocate the execution of, Charles I. But there was a problem. Cromwell's funeral actually occurred without the body, as in the weeks before, roughly 13 days before the funeral, Cromwell's remains had been buried quietly inside of Westminster Abbey. They were placed in a vault to the east end of Henry VII's Lady Chapel, in the Abbey, on the evening of the 10th of November 1658, because of the state of decay of Cromwell's body. Cromwell's remains were rotting very quickly, and this is why the decision was taken to bury him quickly and quietly, but the funeral would go ahead regardless. However, it wouldn't be long before Cromwell's body was disturbed from where it had been laid to rest, as when King Charles II came onto the throne and the monarchy was restored, Charles sought to punish those men who were responsible for the execution of his father. Because of this, he went after the regicides and wanted to put to the sword those who had signed his father's death warrant, and Oliver Cromwell was top of the list of those who Charles II wanted to take action against. But of course Cromwell had died, but this did not stop Charles II, as he would order the exhumation of Cromwell's body, and Cromwell was dug up from his vault in Westminster Abbey. There were a lot of problems doing this, as the wood and cloth made it difficult to prise the body out of the vault, but this did happen, and then the body was taken to the Red Lion Inn at Holborn. Here it was brought with Henry Ireton's body, Cromwell's son-in-law, and the body of John Bradshaw, the judge in Charles I's trial. But then on the 30th of January 1661, the 12th anniversary of Charles I's death, Cromwell's body would be paraded through London. The coffin was cracked open, and pulled behind horses the coffin of Cromwell was, and the people saw the rotting corpse of the former Lord Protector, and it must have been a terrifying sight. But then when the coffin got to Tyburn, Cromwell's remains were taken out, and they were then hanged in chains and displayed from the gallows until 4 in the afternoon. At this point, Cromwell's corpse was then hacked at by an executioner, who beheaded the body, and he then showed the crowd the rotting head of Cromwell. 8 swings of the axe were needed to perform the job, and the body of Cromwell was then thrown into a pit. But Cromwell's head would then be placed on a spike above Westminster Hall. It was placed high above for everyone to see, and was aimed to shame Cromwell, and it was held on this spike until at least 1684. This meant that it lasted 2 decades, 23 years to be precise, but during a great storm which hit London, the wooden pole snapped, and with this Cromwell's head crashed down to the ground. Many people of London saw it as an attraction, as it had been there for so long, and with this the story is that a guard who was patrolling the Exchequer's office found it, and he then hid it under his cloak and then stored the head of Cromwell in the chimney of his home. But people were looking for the head, and they wanted it back above Westminster Hall. But the guard, it was said, seeing the placards, which ordered any one possession it to take to a certain office, was afraid to divulge the secret. He did not want to return it, but then for many years the head of Cromwell disappeared until it would be seen in 1710. It had come into the possession of a Swiss-French collector named Claudius Dupuy, and he had a private museum in the English capital, and he displayed it. His museum was internationally renowned, and many people came to witness the head of Cromwell, which was of course in a state of decay, and it was said this monstrous head could still be so dear and worthy to the English. But following the death of Dupuy in 1739, the head became, rather than a symbol of brutality and national importance, more of a museum exhibit and a curiosity. It was meant to send a warning and to inspire fear, but now it was being used to attract people to museums for money. A failed actor and a drunk named Samuel Russell, who claimed he was related to Cromwell, wanted the head, and he would, after some unsuccessful negotiation, try to purchase it, but he then somehow managed to acquire the head. But in 1780 it was seen by James Clock. But then in 1780 it was seen by James Cox, a clockmaker who stated that he was convinced by all the circumstances that it was the identical head of Cromwell. Cox would try to buy it from Russell, and Russell did not look after it, and he would pass it round at parties. Eventually James Cox did manage to get hold of the head, and he would later sell it in 1799 to the Hughes brothers for a sum of what today would be around £50,000. The brothers wanted to start their own display and curiosities exhibit on Bond Street, but despite the big investment, not many people bothered to visit. In terms of the state of Cromwell's head at this point, it had been kept in some state of preservation because of the embalming, and there was still some skin on top of it. But then following the failing of the exhibition, an offer was then made to Sir Joseph Banks to buy the head, and others tried to purchase it. But it was then in 1815 sold to Josiah Henry Wilkinson, and one person who saw the head said she had seen Oliver Cromwell's head, not his picture, not his bust, nothing of stone or marble or plaster of Paris, but his real head. In 1845 another inspection of his head took place, and it was said that it has hair, flesh and beard. Some doubted that this actually did belong to Cromwell, but others conceded that it was the head of someone of great distinction, due to the state of decomposition it was in, and the fact the head still had hair, meaning it was preserved with the best ways in the 17th century. In 1911 another examination took place, and it was said that there was a moral certainty that this head did belong to Oliver Cromwell. However, in 1960, the head of Oliver Cromwell was finally laid to rest in a permanent site of burial. The Wilkinson family wished to give the head a proper burial, rather than place it on display for the public, and it was discussed that it would be interred inside of Sydney Sussex College, which Cromwell attended in his younger days. On the 25th of March 1960, 300 years after Cromwell had died, the head was placed in an oak box and was buried somewhere near the antechamber in a secret location. It was placed in an airtight container to preserve it for the future, and was buried with only a few witnesses. Oliver Cromwell is still a very controversial figure in history today, and he was the man who ordered the execution of a king, and had been a leading power behind this. But his head, following his own posthumous execution, would go on a remarkable journey through many different hands over 3 centuries, and it remained unburied. The mystery as to what happened to Cromwell's body is something that's still unsolved today, and some believe it was interred in a vault in a church belonging to his daughter's husband, but this is still yet to have been confirmed. The head of Cromwell was seen as the face of evil when it was hacked from the rotting body, and it was meant to horrify people in London every day they passed underneath it, but over time it became an attraction and a curiosity, then it did not invoke the same amount of fear as it did in the centuries before, but it's still incredibly shocking. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.